Okay, so we just talked for 15, 20 minutes about uh, the current events, but let's talk about McCarthyism. In the Cold War, um, 1940s, 50s, 60s, 70s, what do we know about the Cold War? Who were the big countries involved? What do we know? It
Is
was
it talking about the communists?
Yeah, okay. So it was capitalism versus communism, right? It was America versus the communist countries. What was the main communist country back then? Who was the main enemy of the United States in the Cold War? Do we know? Jendai, do you know who was the main communist country?
Um, the main country, is it Korea?
Well, there was Korea. Okay, it was North Korea. Um, but really, the main country that everybody was concerned with was Russia, right? Um,
So Russia's the enemy.
yeah, in the Cold War. Okay, now the
Oh,
Cold War
that's
isn't really what's that?
that's just what I was kind of thinking.
Yeah. Yeah, when you think of the Cold War, think of Russia. Think of communist Russia. Yes, definitely communism, definitely Russia. Now, of course, the Cold War isn't a war, it's a time period. Um, so you have the Cold, well, let me pull up. I have somewhere. Uh, let me get my timeline. Okay, so here's my history timeline that I made. Where is the Cold War? This gray bar is the Cold War. Okay, so the Cold War, we say, lasts from basically the end of World War II, shortly after World War II, up until 1989, 1990, 1991. Okay, we've talked about the Cold War before. So it's a time period. It's not really a war. It doesn't refer to a specific war. It's a time period, the Cold War. Cold because it wasn't a hot war. There wasn't action. There wasn't, the flames of an actual war. But there were wars within the Cold War time period. Korea was one of them. North Korea, South Korea. The Korean War was in the 1950s. You have the Vietnam War as part of the Cold War. It was 1955, 1975, really long time. Okay. Um, both of those are America fighting communism, but kind of doing it like by using other countries. Okay. So Korea, we supported South Korea as they fought communist North Korea, and Russia was supporting communist North Korea. So it was like us versus Russia, but we were using South Korea and North Korea to do the actual fighting. You know what I mean? Like we were kind of, it was United States and Russia standing behind South Korea and North Korea. Same thing with Vietnam. We're fighting to keep Vietnam from becoming communist. Okay, so uh, that's the Cold War. Now McCarthyism happens during the Cold War. You have Senator Joe McCarthy. Senators, there's 100 of them. We all know there's 100 senators. They are pretty powerful. The United States Senate is a pretty big deal. Okay. So we'll read this McCarthyism. We can take turns reading some paragraphs. I've highlighted some good historical vocabulary. Let's look at the headings. Okay. So we have an introduction. The atomic era. Tail Gunner Joe is shot down. Blacklisting. If you're blacklisted, today. Do you know what that means? Blacklisting refers then and now. You're put on a list, you know, a list of people who, you know, maybe you can't get a job, you can't, you know, you can't do things if you're on this list. And sometimes it's an actual list, and sometimes it's just kind of pretend. If you are unpopular in your community, if you've done something wrong in the world, you can be blacklisted. People, you know, people don't like you, they're not going to hire you, they're not going to support you. Okay, and then other witch hunt victims. So let's take turns here. Let me get back to the top. Um, let me read the introduction, and we can go from there. Okay, now think of this as we go. Think, is there, uh, listen for a, like a main topic sentence. Okay. All right, paragraph 1, it says, are you now, or this is in quotes, are you now or have you ever been a member of the Communist Party? In the 1950s, thousands of Americans who toiled in the government, served in the army, worked in the movie industry, or came from various walks of life had to answer that question before a congressional panel. Senator Joseph McCarthy. Okay, so that first paragraph is not really telling us much, but it's kind of putting us in the setting, you know, putting us in the place of what we're going to be talking about. 1950s, thousands of Americans had to answer that question before a congressional panel. Are you now or have you ever been a member of the Communist Party? It says Senator Joseph McCarthy rose to national prominence by initiating a probe to ferret out communists holding prominent positions. During his investigations, safeguards promised by the Constitution were trampled. Why were so many held in thrall to the Wisconsin lawmaker? Why was an environment that some likened to the Salem witch trials tolerated? Okay, when there's an introduction and you see questions, why is it important to notice those questions in an introductory paragraph? What do you think those questions are there for?
I think those questions are going to be answered in the subsequent paragraphs.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So when you see, I mean, that's like it's such an easy thing. It makes your job so much easier when you're reading. If there's an introduction and it ends with some questions, or if there's questions in it, right, this ends with two questions, we're definitely going to get these answers, right? This is telling us exactly what this whole essay article is going to be about. Why were so many held in thrall? Why were we enthralled or captivated to the Wisconsin lawmaker? Why were people so obedient and following of him? Why was an environment that some likened to the Salem witch trials tolerated? Okay. So we're going to find out exactly what he did wrong, if it was good or bad, how he was doing these, why was it like the Salem witch trials, you know. But those are, you know, when you see questions in an introduction, that's great because it tells you exactly what you're going to be finding out. All right, Ola Wakimi, could you read paragraph 3, the atomic era?
In 1947, President Truman had ordered background checks for every civilian in service to the government. When Hagar Hayes, a high-ranking State Department official, was convinced on espionage charges, fear of communists intensified. McCarthy capitalized on national paranoia by proclaiming that communist spies were omnipresent and that it was Americans' only salvation.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so some good words in there. 1947. This is 3 years after the end of World War II. Okay, makes sense. President Truman, Harry Truman at the time, he orders background checks of every civilian in service to the government. Background checks. Okay, make sure you're not a criminal. Make sure you maybe during the war that just happened. Maybe you were, make sure you were
Ah,
on the side of the United States. And Alger Hiss, a high ranking State Department official, is convicted on espionage charges, being a spy, espionage, being a spy. So Senator McCarthy capitalizes on national paranoia, okay, takes advantage of the situation by proclaiming that communist spies were omnipresent. What does omnipresent mean? Do we know?
Present everywhere.
Yeah, omni means every, everything, everywhere. So omnipresent. He says communist spies are everywhere, and that he, McCarthy, was America's only salvation. Okay. So yes, are there communist spies in the government? Yeah. Okay.
I'm
Maybe
looking
there
at
was.
that too. See,
Alger Hiss was convicted
His
of
blessings
being
or
a
whatever. I
spy.
can take down to Caesar Peace. Like,
But let's, we're gonna see McCarthy took it too far, and we're gonna see that. Jendai, could you read paragraph 4?
Can I read?
Oh, Brittany, yeah, Brittany, why don't you read paragraph 4? Go ahead.
Okay. An atmosphere of fear of war. Oh, wait, I can't see right. Of war dimension by communities hung over America in the post war years. There were fears of a nuclear holocaust
Hmm.
based on the knowledge world. Wait, based on the knowledge that the Soviet Union exploded its first A bomb in 1949. The same year, the world's most populous nation, became communist. Half of Europe was under Joseph Stalin's influence, and every time Americans read their newspaper, there seemed to be new autom- automic, automic threat,
Atomic threat. Okay.
atomic.
Yeah. So thank you. The period after World War II was very scary. Okay. World War II ends in 1944 with us, the United States, dropping atomic bombs on Japan. Right. It was the first time the atomic bomb had been used. We were the first ones to discover it, and we used it to end World War II in 1944. The Soviet Union, Russia, the Soviet Union explodes its first atomic bomb in 1949. So now they have that capability. Okay. Kind of scary for us to know that we're now not the only people who can do that. That same year, 1949, China, the world's most populous nation, becomes communist. Okay. Uh, Half of Europe is under Joseph Stalin. He's the leader of Russia at the time, Soviet Union at the time. Um, and every time Americans read the newspapers, there seemed to be a new atomic threat. So the world was a scary place. It seemed, Russia the Soviet Union got atomic bombs, 1949, and China became communist. So you have a threat, a real threat from communism across the world. An atmosphere of fear of world domination by communists hung over America in the post war years. We were afraid that communism was going to sweep across the globe and every country would become communist and threaten us. We're not communist, we're capitalist, right? Different economic system, different government system. And so that we were afraid. Okay. and those are two good facts. The Soviet Union gets the atomic bomb in 1949. China becomes communist. That's a big deal. Okay, so America was kind of freaking out a little bit. Jendai, can you read paragraph 5 here?
At a speech at a speech in Wheeling, West Virginia on February 9th, 1950, McCarthy launched his first salvo. He proclaimed that he was aware of 205 card-carrying members of the Communist Party who worked for the United States Department of State. A few days later, he repeated the charges at a speech in Salt Lake City. McCarthy soon began to attract headlines, and the Senate asked him to make his case.
Okay, so thank you. So at a speech 1950, McCarthy launched his first salvo. A salvo is like when you fire the first bombs of an attack. Okay, so it's kind of he begins his attack. In that speech, I don't know much about that speech, but he says he was aware. I think he held up a piece of paper and he said, "I have a list of 205 members of the Communist Party who are working in our government in the State Department, which is like the part of the executive branch that deals with other countries, right? Is our liaison with other countries is the State Department." And I believe he did hold up a list. And he said, "I have a list of 205 actual Americans who are communists who are working in the State Department." Well, that was, if that's true, that's a big deal. So the Senate asked him to make his case. Paragraph 6, it says, on February 20th, 1950, so that's 11 days later, McCarthy addressed the Senate and made a list of dubious claims against suspected communists. He cited 81 cases that day. He skipped several numbers and for some cases repeated the same flimsy information. He proved nothing, but the Senate called for a full investigation. McCarthy was in the national spotlight. So you could see, and you could, you can see old YouTube videos and read more about this and see more about this. Joseph McCarthy was a senator from Wisconsin, and he a lot of people think he just wanted attention. He loved the drama and to have like it says, the national spotlight on him. And so in this second speech, or the speech he gives to the Senate, it says, he cites 81 cases that day, skipped a few numbers, had flimsy information. He wasn't really convincing. But it says something about the fear that everybody had of communism, that they could be taken along by such a bad, weak argument. Okay. Paragraph 7.
So basically, excuse me.
Mhm.
So basically, he like what he said wasn't true, or was it true?
There, it basically wasn't true. It basically wasn't true.
Yeah.
He held up a paper and said, "I have 205. I have a list of 205 names." He never gave that list to anybody. Like basically, what historians think is he was full of crap. um,
Mm-hmm.
and I mean, we're going to see in a minute exactly how far he takes this threat.
Mm-hmm.
Um, were there people who were secretly communists in the government? Maybe, but for reasons unknown, he got himself, all
Unconvinced.
yeah, he convinced himself maybe that this was a real problem, and and living in America at the time, they were really it just in daily life, it was a real concern that the world, they had just come out of World War II. It was crazy. They were really afraid that America's happy, secure position in the world was in danger. And when people feel threatened, they do crazy things sometimes. So um, yeah, basically, I mean, we're going to see. Yeah, by and large, McCarthy was not entirely telling the truth. I mean, basically, we historians say he was, yeah, full, like I said, full of crap. Um, okay, but he loved the spotlight, um, and he was a senator, and U.S. senators, the Senate is a big deal,
Mhm.
and so he started. We're going to see. He started holding every day. Uh, he the Senate or the committee in the Senate held hearings and had people come in and testify and be accused of being communists, and most of them were not. Um, so we're gonna, well, we can go on here. Um, Olabakimi, can you read paragraph 8?
What about 7? As
Oh, I read that. Oh, maybe I didn't. Yeah, I meant to read 7. I thought I did. Staying in the headlines, it says, I'll read 7. Staying in the headlines was a full-time job. After accusing low-level officials, McCarthy went for the big guns, even questioning the loyalty of Dean Acheson and George Marshall. Now, I can't remember who those guys are, but they were, pretty high up in the government. Some Republicans in the Senate were aghast and disavowed McCarthy. Others, such as Robert Taft and Richard Nixon, this is before he was president, saw him as an asset. The public rewarded the witch hunters by sending red baiters, communist accusers, before the Senate and House in 1950. Okay, so some people, he was Republican, and a lot of Democrats said, "Hey, what he's doing is hurtful." But some Republicans um, took advantage of the way he was accusing people of being communist and trashing their reputation. Um, so we'll go ahead and so Olawakimi, now can you read paragraph 8? Sorry about that.
Mister.
Ted Gunner,
Oh, I'm sorry.
go
Go
ahead.
ahead. No. Go ahead.
Ted Gunner John shut down. When Dwight Eisenhower became president, he had no love for McCarthy. Ike was reluctant to condemn McCarthy for fear of splitting the Republican Party. McCarthy's accusations went on into 1954 when the Wisconsin senator focused on the United States Army. For 8 weeks, in televised hearing, McCarthy interrogated Army officials, including many decorated war heroes. But this was his tragic mistake. Television illustrated the spiritedness of McCarthy's campaign. The army then went on the attack, questioning McCarthy's method and credibility. In one memorable
Fusillade.
fusillade, the counsel for the army simply asked McCarthy, at long last, have you no sense of decency left?
Okay, thank you. So, and this is an interesting point. Okay, so it goes from 1950, goes into 1954, off and on, and in 1950 he turns his attention to accusing people in the army, high up generals, officials in the United States Army of being communist. And what he would do is he would, in a Senate, not the full Senate of 100 people, but in I forget what committee, a committee of maybe 15, 20 senators, they would, in a big hearing room, they'd call you in and accuse you of being a communist, and you were seen doing this, and we have we read your mail, and you were being investigated by the FBI and stuff like that. And you would have to defend yourself. But as we see in society, if you've ever been accused of something that you haven't done, let's say you're accused of something in your family, or accused by a friend of something you didn't do, just being accused hurts, right? And even if you can prove you didn't do that thing, sometimes people are going to remember that you were the person who were accused of doing something, right? That's what's in their head. So just being accused of being a communist and having to go in front of this Senate committee, um, it's a big deal. Even if you can prove you're not a communist, it's still a big deal back then. So he turns his attention to the army, and for 8 weeks in televised hearing, McCarthy interrogated army officials. It says, but this was his tragic mistake. Television illustrated the mean-spiritedness of McCarthy's campaign. And that's kind of an interesting point, as we now live in a world with YouTube and Twitter and um, around the clock news of 100. You can go a thousand different places to get news. Um, the technology that we use to get our news affects how we see it, right? And so McCarthy, if you're just reading about Senator McCarthy, if you're just reading in the newspaper about how he questioned this person of being a communist, that's different than if you see it on the television screen. This is in the 50s, right? 1950s, black and white TV, but they have evening news. And if you can see on the evening news every night, this Senator McCarthy, let's look at a picture of him again. He can be a mean looking guy, he's older, he's balding, he's got, mean looking eyebrows. If you see him on your television screen being mean and yelling at people and yelling at army generals, you're going to start to think, hey, maybe this guy, maybe he's kind of nuts. Maybe he's not right. And seeing him on television sort of turned people's views around of what he was doing. And so there was this famous thing where he was questioning somebody, and the counsel, the lawyer for the army, just stood up. He's just beating up, just with his attacks, with his words, just beating up this army general or whoever he's questioning. And the person famously, the lawyer for the army, counsel for the army, famously stands up and he says, "At long last, have you no sense of decency left?" Basically saying, like, what's wrong with you? Like, why are you questioning these obviously patriotic Americans? Do you have no sense of decency left? And that was kind of the moment where people sort of woke up and said, this Joe McCarthy, he's kind of out of control. Maybe communism is a bad thing. It's a dangerous thing. But that was kind of the end of his televised uh, hearings with the Senate. Um,
Can I read 9?
yeah, Brittany, go ahead. Read paragraph 9.
Poll after poll showed the American people thought McCarthy unscrupulous in his attack of the army. Fed up, McCarthy's colleagues considered him for dishonoring the Senate, and the hearings became to a close. Poly, poly
Plagued.
with poor health and alcoholism, McCarthy himself died 3 years later.
Okay. So yeah, that was kind of the end, when that person famously said, "At long last, have you no sense of decency left?" Um, the American people thought McCarthy unscrupulous in his attack of the army, unwise, bad decision, kind of a bad person, being unscrupulous. And so his senator colleagues, his fellow senators censured him or punished him. Basically, and the Senate could do this with President Trump. They could not censor like where you censor people's what they're saying, but censure, censur, censure. It's basically they could pass it's not a law, but they could vote on basically passing a statement that says we don't agree with what President Trump did. Basically the Senate could say, they could, if they wanted, they could censure President Trump and say what he did was wrong. Right? Doesn't really do anything, but it they would vote and they would, put their names on it and sign it and agree to it and say, we officially say what the president did was wrong. So they censured Joseph McCarthy. They said, hey, what he's doing is wrong. It's dishonoring the Senate. It's not how we want to do things. And it says the hearings came to a close. So that was it, really, 1954. He died 3 years later. Okay. Let's read, we got 10 more minutes. Let's read blacklisting here. Jendai, could you read paragraph 10?
McCarthy was not the only individual to seek out potential communists. The House Committee on Un-American Activities targeted the Hollywood film industry. Actors, writers, and producers alike were summoned to appear before the committee and provide names of colleagues who may have been members of the Communist Party. Those who repented and named names of suspected communists were allowed to return to business as usual. Those who refused to address the committee were cited for contempt. For contempt, uncooperative artists were blacklisted from the jobs from jobs in the entertainment industry. Years passed until many have their reputations restored.
Okay. All right. Well, let's pause there. So McCarthy was a senator, so he's doing things in the Senate, and this is the House, a subcommittee, a committee in the House of Representatives. The House Committee on Un-American Activities was also doing this um, communist hunting, trying to find communists in the government and in society, and they focused on Hollywood. So actors, writers, producers were accused of, brought before the House Committee on Un-American Activities, accused of being communists. And if you could say, well, I'm not a communist, but I'll tell you 10 people who are, then they'd let you go. If you didn't, then they would say you're being uncooperative and you must be a communist because you're not cooperating with us, right? So it's kind of it's a wacky system. And so people were naming names, accusing other people of being communists just so they wouldn't be accused of communists. And people were blacklisted from jobs in the entertainment industry. They couldn't get a job because they've been accused of being a communist. Paragraph 12, were there in fact communists in America? The answer is undoubtedly yes, but many of the accused had attended party rallies, communist party rallies, 15 or more years before the hearings. It had been fashionable to do so in the 1930s. Although the Soviet spy ring did penetrate the highest levels of the American government, the vast majority of the accused were innocent victims. All across America, state legislatures and school boards mimicked McCarthy and they say HUAC, the House Committee on Un-American Activities. Thousands of people lost their jobs and had their reputations tarnished. Okay, so in the 1950s, it's Joseph McCarthy's kind of the face of this communist, all these communist accusations, but it happens at the local level, state legislature, school boards. Let's say a teacher. This is 5-10 years after World War II. Let's say a teacher teaches, let's say history class, American history class, and they teach it in the wrong way, and maybe they are a little bit sympathetic to communism. Maybe your school board pulls you up and says, "Hey, we think you're a communist. You're fired." So this is happening in America. It's happening in the Senate. It's happening in the House of Representatives. It's happening at the local, state, and local level as well. People were afraid that the people around them were communists. All right, let me read this last section. Other witch hunt victims. Unions were special targets of communist hunters. Sensing an unfavorable environment, the AFL, American Federation of Labor, and the CIO, Congress of Industrial Organizations, two big labor unions in America, merged in 1955 to close ranks. So today we hear about sometimes the AFL CIO. Books were pulled from library shelves, including Robin Hood. We all know the story of Robin Hood, right? Which was deemed communist like for suggesting stealing from the rich to give to the poor. So that story, the story of Robin Hood, steals from the rich, gives to the poor in England. You know, it's an old story. They're saying that was too much like communism. So the book is taken off the shelves in schools and libraries. No politician could consider opening trade with China or withdrawing from Southeast Asia without being branded a communist. So it affects, we see it affects, the fear of communism or the fear of being accused of being a communist is going to affect our relationship with China. China is a huge nation even back then, right? We want to have a good, healthy trading relationship. But if you step forward as a leader and say, "Hey, let's have better relationships with China," you're going to be accused of being a communist. So it says, although McCarthyism was dead by the 1950s, its effects lasted for decades. Above all, several messages became crystal clear to the average American. Don't criticize the United States. Don't be different. Just conform. So that's the danger. When you have a Joseph McCarthy falsely accusing people, it's going to change people's behavior. Uh, maybe for the good, but mostly for the bad. Um, as this says, were there communists in America? Certainly. Were there communist spies in America? Certainly there were, even in the highest levels of the American government. Okay. As we were spying on Russia, the Soviet Union, there was a lot of spies in the Soviet in the Cold War period. Was it a real danger? Yes. But the point is, most historians would agree Joseph McCarthy and his Senate hearings and his accusations were over the top, were dangerous, were damaging to individuals' lives. Once you're accused of something, it sticks with you. Okay, so it's an interesting part of the Cold War, and as we prepare for the GED history test or the social studies test, GED or high set, having some understanding of the Cold War period, how that affected people's lives, how the government acted during the Cold War, it's an important thing to understand. So, any questions about McCarthyism, the Cold War? Any questions about any of this? Have you guys heard of Joe McCarthy before, or is this new?
No, this was my first time.
Yeah. I think there is some of these videos. Like if you Google McCarthyism or Joe McCarthy Senate hearings, I think you can probably find some videos on YouTube and see what they saw. People tuned in on the news at night and saw some things, and it's kind of neat to. One cool thing about YouTube is you can find those old videos and see what it was like to watch that news. So, all right, well, keep working hard in your classes. I appreciate you logging in today. If you see anything in the news or you come across anything in history or as you're studying or whatever, you want to talk more about it, or if you have any questions, just let me know, and we can always change course and talk about what you need. Okay. So thanks for logging in, everybody. If you don't have any questions, then have a great day.
Bye.
Thank you. Have a beautiful weekend.
Hey, you too. See you, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.